So today I am going to teach how to make this faux quilted 12 by 12 layout. I've put mine on a white cardstock base, and then I have picked a green solid cardstock, and then 3 different Christmas pattern papers to use. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my green cardstock and I'm going to cut the larger base elements to start creating this faux quilt. So you're going to use almost the whole sheet of paper. Like you can see that it covers almost the whole white sheet of paper. The first square you want to cut is one large 5 by 5 square, and that's going to be the center element of your page. So you're going to take your green cardstock and you're going to cut at 5 inches. Then you're going to take that strip, turn it, and cut it at 5 inches again. Then you have a 5 by 5 square, and you'll have a 5 by 7 left over. From that 5 by 7, you'll be able to cut 2 3 by 5s. So from your first strip of paper, you have cut a 5 by 5 and 2 3 by 5s from one row of paper. Now we still need 2 more 3 by 5s after that. So you'll take your large 12 by 12 paper again. This time you're going to cut it, so I guess you would have a 7 by 12 sheet left, so you're going to cut a 3 by 12 inch strip off the second time and cut 2 more 3 by 5s. And I'll wait until everybody's gotten that done.
So we have 4 3 by 5s from the one sheet.
4 3 by 5s and a 5 by 5. And then you should have enough left at the bottom to get 4 more 3 by 3s. So in total, you want a 5 by 5 square, 4 3 by 5 rectangles, and 4 3 by 3 squares. And if you do it right, you'll be able to easily get that all from one sheet of paper. Do you want a bigger sheet to write on?
That's okay.
So yeah, if you're just writing measurements down to do this later, 1 5 by 5, 4 3 by 5, 4 3 by 3.
This is out of the green paper, right?
This is out of the solid cardstock. Yours doesn't have to be green. It would depend on what you're making. But yeah, the solid cardstock, or if you wanted a subtle pattern, whatever your base pieces are that give you the layout of the base of the quilt.
And so you said what were they again?
So
you said
yeah, all good. 1 5 by 5, 4 3 by 5s,
okay.
and 4 3 by 3s.
I'm gonna do it later, but I just want to
Yeah,
write down the
no,
inside.
absolutely. Once we've done that, we're gonna go ahead and glue those down. We'll create sort of like the base layout of our project. And for me, like, it's hard for me to fit this whole thing in the computer screen, but you can see that there's less of a gap in between each of these green pieces than there is along the outer edge. So I glued my 5 by 5 one right smack dab in the center. I measured into the center and centered my green one right in the middle. And then I kept them all pretty close. So I kept the distance between these cardstock sheets as small as possible, you know, like it's probably 1/8 of an inch or maybe even less, a 1/16 of an inch. And then there's much more white space around the outer edge. So that's how I chose to space mine out. If you want to try and get a more even spacing between all of them, you'll want to leave more of a gap between these greens to try and even out the difference, if that makes sense. But for me, I glued this 5 by 5 down in the center, and then, you know, a 1/16 of an inch away from that, I glued my first 3 by 5. And the top and bottom will line up perfectly because they are both have that same 5 inch dimension. And then on the other side, I glue another 3 by 5. And then same thing out the top and bottom. 3 by 5, and a 3 by 5. Then clearly there's spots in each corners for the 3 by 3s. So you'll fill in those blank spots with your 3 by 3s. And then you have the base for this quilted pattern that we'll build our pattern papers up on top of. So it will look just like that. Now once you have that sort of all lined up, it's okay if you don't glue them all down right now. It doesn't have to be glued down. Just to me, it's one less piece of cut papers cluttering my desk. I can move those then off to the side because they're glued down and they're not getting in my way. But if you don't have them glued down yet, it's not a big deal. You can glue them down later. But I just like to have them glued down so I can slide them off to the side and start working on my patterns. Now we have 3 pattern papers, and for you, you will have to decide which pattern you want to be what. For the purpose of this demo, I'm gonna call these 2, for me, it's the white background with the snowflakes and the blue with the ornaments. The ones that are together on the rectangles, I'm gonna call those pattern 1 and 2. And this brown snowflake, when I refer to it, it's pattern 3. So we'll start with pattern 1 and 2. For those, for each of them, you need 4 rectangles at 2 3/4 of an inch by 4 3/4 of an inch. So very similar to our green rectangles, just 1/4 of an inch smaller in both directions. Our base rectangle was a 3 by 5. These ones, I just chopped 1/4 of an inch off in both directions. So 2 3/4 by 4 3/4. Now, if you did not take my direction and you chose a pattern paper, that the direction matters. You want to make sure that 2 of your rectangles are vertical and 2 are horizontal. But hopefully you just picked a totally directionally neutral pattern that it doesn't matter, and then you just cut 4 rectangles.
You said you used it on 2 different patterns, you said?
2 different patterns, yep.
And what were they again? The measurements again?
2 3/4 by 4 3/4.
And how many of those did you make?
4 of each, so you'll have 8 in total. 4 of pattern 1 and 4 of pattern 2. Now once you've cut those, you can just set them off to the side for a minute. We'll get all of our base pieces cut, and then we'll start doing all the angles and the tricky work. So for pattern 3, this one's a simpler pattern. There's really, like you can see, it's mostly just squares. You're gonna want 4 squares that are 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. And you're not gonna have to do anything to those. Those are just getting glued on top of the 3 by 3 green squares or whatever your cardstock color is, and that's that. So there's 4 squares that are 2 3/4 by 2 3/4, and they get glued as is right onto your 3 by 3 green squares. You will also, however, need 2 smaller squares that are 1 3/4 inches by 1 3/4 inches. So 2 smaller squares, 1 3/4 by 1 3/4. And these ones are
Just a little bit?
slow down.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yes, of course, yeah. Yeah, I'll give you a minute to catch up. And then if anyone else has any questions about what we've done to get to this point, you can go ahead and let me know.
The small triangle sizes, please, in the middle.
These ones? Like these?
Yes.
So those are these little 1 3/4 inch squares that we just cut, and then we're gonna cut them in half. Like not in half like straight, but on an angle, like this way. Does that make sense?
Got it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what those 2 little squares were for.
Which pattern paper was that cut out of?
This is pattern 3. pattern 3 was 4 squares at 2 3/4 by 2 3/4, and those just got glued down in the corners. And pattern 3 was also 2 squares at 1 3/4, cut in half, but on an angle half, so that you're left with 4 triangles when you're done. And like Ramona had mentioned, those are the 4 triangles that go in this centerpiece.
Okay, so the 4 squares in the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are those sizes again?
The base piece is a 3 by 3, the cardstock piece in the bottom. And then the top layer, which I'm calling pattern 3, is 2 3/4 inch by 2 3/4 inch.
Got it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And there was 4 of them. Yeah, there's lots of numbers and measurements included in this, but all the concepts are pretty simple, so hopefully it's not confusing. It's just like a lot of numbers is all. And feel free to keep on working on what you're working on, because now the next direction that I'm about to tell you, I know I'm gonna have to say it many times. So like if you miss it, I promise it's gonna have to be said again, so don't panic. I'm just gonna go run to the front desk though, because I forgot my things that I need. So I am going to take my first rectangle of pattern 1 and pattern 2. Remember, we have 4 of each one that measure 2 3/4 by 4 3/4. I'm going to take 1 of each. I'm going to flip it over so that I can't see my penmanship when I am done my project. And on the lengthwise, I'm going to teach this like as if everyone's using paper that is directionally free. So I'm not going to worry about what's top, what's bottom. I'm going to trust that you're all using patterns that can be, like there's no such thing as upside down. But what you do want to do is take this 4 3/4 inch length. So we're measuring against this long side. We're going to flip it over from the top side, from this top corner. We're going to measure down 2 inches and draw a tick. Just like a little dot, just so you remember where 2 inches in from the top is. So just like a little pen dot right there at 2 inches. Then you're going to slide it down on your ruler or your trimmer so that the bottom is along an inch line, and you're going to measure up 2 inches. So now I have a dot 2 inches from the top, and I have a dot 2 inches from the bottom.
Dot 2 inches from the top. The dot.
Chantel, can you pin yourself?
Oh, I didn't realize I wasn't. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Spotlight for everyone. Okay. So
I
one.
was asked the same question.
Awesome. Sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't done that. I'm sorry, guys. So once you have one of your patterns, you've flipped it upside down. From the top, you've measured down 2 inches, drawn a dot. You've measured up 2 inches, drawn a dot. Now you're gonna, I don't have a ruler here, so I just use like a scrap piece of paper. So from the bottom dot, I'm gonna start at the bottom dot that I drew. I'm gonna measure up kitty corner to the opposite top corner, and I'm gonna draw a line. So when I'm looking at this piece of paper, my dots are on the right-hand side of the piece of paper, and I'm gonna draw a line from the bottom right dot up to the top left corner. Once I draw it too, visually, it will probably be more clear too. So top left corner to bottom right dot. And then I'm going to draw a line from the bottom left corner to the top right dot. draw that darker so it's easier to see on the computer screen. Okay, so then it's going to look like that. So we've measured in 2 inches from the bottom, in 2 inches from the top, drawn little dots, and then you connect the dots to the corners, but the opposite corners. So the top dot goes to the bottom corner, the bottom dot goes to the top corner.
On the back, just like this?
On the back. Yeah, exactly like that, Ramona. Yeah, and just on the back so that you don't see it is all.
On all 8 pieces?
Well, we'll get there, but yes, you are going to
Okay.
on all 8
All
pieces.
right.
Yeah. So once you've done that, you're going to cut the lines. And the reason why we drew the lines and didn't just cut to connect the dot is once we cut this first line, then all of a sudden you don't have the visual to get you across. So you're going to need that line drawn there to help you with the rest of that cut. So I'm going to take it to my trimmer. I'm going to cut along this line. Then I'm going to cut along this line and that line. Show you what I mean. So I've cut along that line, and you can see now, if I had just drawn a dot there and was gonna go to connect the dots, they're 2 separate pieces, so I'd be like awkwardly trying to hold it still in my trimmer to be able to connect the dots. So you draw the line there so that even on this piece that's now disattached, you have a line to follow. So I'm just gonna follow all the lines on all my papers.
Okay, they're 2 different sizes
What
after they're cut.
what you mean?
Well, they turned out 2 different sizes. One smaller than the other one.
They shouldn't. Mine are the same.
Okay, hold on. Oh.
They should be the same. Like if you face them opposite directions, they should be the same size. Mine are the same size.
Oh, I see, because one has a corner cut off, right?
Yeah, you have to cut all the lines.
All the lines.
That's how come we drew lines instead of just.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so cut off the edges. Okay.
Yeah.
So what about this extra triangle? We just
So
keep that there?
the cool thing about this is if you're organized, like if maybe you were assembling 2 at a time or something, you can create 2 layouts with this. They'll just be the exact opposite of one another, right? So for this layout, I've chosen to keep the triangle for pattern 1, and for pattern 2, I chose to keep these shapes. But if for layout 2, I used these shapes from, do you know what I mean? The opposite ones, you can actually create 2 layouts with the same pieces. Does that make sense?
Got it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So if you're organized and keeping track of them, you can actually make 2 layouts with this. But just to keep it simple, so I'm not confusing people, you're just gonna pick which, like I'm working on the snowflake pattern right now, so I'm keeping these pieces. But if you were working on the pattern that you wanted to be the triangles, you would keep the triangle. And then once you've done that, you're going to take, so that was, we're calling it pattern 1. Now pattern 2, you're going to do the exact same thing. And then we'll be able to piece those pieces together on top of one of our 3x5 rectangles and create our first of 4 quilt pieces that go along the outer edge. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this pattern paper over just so that my pen marks aren't on the front. I'm going to measure down 2 inches from the top corner and draw a tick. And then I'm going to measure up 2 inches from the bottom corner and draw a tick. So I have a tick at 2 inches from either side along the 4 3/4 inch length side. We're doing this along the long side. Once I've done that, I'm going to take my straight edge, whether that's a scrap piece of paper or a ruler or whatever you want, and I'm going to connect the bottom right dot with the top left corner. And I'm going to draw a line connecting those. And then I'm going to take the top right dot and the bottom left corner and draw a line so that I'm connecting the opposites. Top dot with the bottom corner, bottom dot, top corner. Once I've done that, I'm just going to cut those lines again. It's exactly how you drew them. And then you'll be able to connect all the pieces on your 3x5.
Chantel, should we be gluing those pattern papers down as we go so they don't?
Yes, if you're like if you don't have any questions, if you've got to this step, you've cut pattern 1 and pattern 2, you're happy with it, then yes, I inked the edges of mine for my actual demo. But yeah, you could start gluing down, then you're just gonna do that 3 more times, and then you're done your quilt. So that is all the techniques around it. Does anybody have any questions yet? I know you'll have to like continue the process a few more times before you're finished, but is there any questions at this point that will help you work on that? Awesome. Okay, well, I'll sit